Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Usted ha hablado durante su intervención sobre mentores, mitos y memorias como los sueños de un maestro, de un docente. ¿Cree que el papel del maestro, del profesor de lenguas o de otra materia está hoy en día mitificado o desmitificado en nuestra sociedad?
Well, I think the first thing to say about teachers is what an incredibly important role they have in society. They probably spend between 8 and 10 hours a day with our children. They're very much responsible for raising the next generation. We never know where a teacher's influence will end, because a teacher will teach a child and the child might become a great person or a great teacher and then teach another generation. If you think about all the great figures of the past, maybe Nelson Mandela, he must have had a teacher. Einstein must have had a mathematics teacher. Shakespeare had a teacher of language. Those teachers are never given the credit that they deserve, but their value in society, I think we cannot even measure it. We cannot measure the value of a teacher. So to sum up my answer to your question, I think teachers should be very highly valued in society. Whether this means they will be paid more is a very difficult thing, because obviously that's tied up with politics, economics, other bigger systems, but they must be valued. Yeah.
Como profesor de lingüística, escritura, publicación, ¿qué parte de cada una de estas áreas debe reunir un profesor de idiomas hoy en día?
Okay, I think a really great teacher will have a very broad knowledge of all of these elements. Maybe not creative writing, that's not necessary, but certainly the more you know about linguistics, the more it will help you to understand what's happening with your students when they're trying to learn a language. The more you know about ESL methods, the better the teacher you will be. You know, there's never a limit on teacher knowledge. The more we know, the better. So we need to read widely, keep learning. That's the key thing for teachers, to keep learning, keep being students.
¿Qué importancia tiene la narrativa en la enseñanza de idiomas, desde su punto de vista?
Mm-hmm. So that's narrative, narrativa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, stories, I think, are an essential element of all education. You know, storytelling has been used in all education for thousands of years. We can go back as far as the Bible. The parables, they are stories that are used to teach people. Not only Christianity, all the religions have stories. Stories are how we read the world. Stories teach us how to behave. You know, stories always have heroes who teach us how to live, who teach us what to do in difficult circumstances. So I think the idea of a story is really essential in all of education. Also, the idea of a beginning, a middle and an end to narrative is very appealing, because we want to get to the end. So I think as a tool, the story is really essential. That's how people read the world. We tell our life story, don't we? When someone asks us, what did you do yesterday? We cannot show them what we did. We tell the story of what we did. So story is essential to the human condition, and therefore it's part of education, all education.
¿Y la puesta en escena? Performance?
Performance of stories,
yes.
also.
In classroom?
In classroom, absolutely. Performance of stories is another, it's a great tool for learning. It uses language, it uses movement, it uses the mind. So, yeah.
Desde su experiencia en diferentes países donde ha dado clase como profesor, ¿cuál cree que son los principales hándicaps de los profesores de idiomas en España?
In España. Okay, as I see it, that question kind of has two parts. So you're talking about maybe what are the difficulties for Spanish students learning English, but also what are the difficulties for the teachers?
For the teacher.
For the teachers, okay. I've only been in Spain a week. I've never worked here, so I don't have enough experience to talk in any detail about the teacher's situation in Spain. You know, I'm really not the person to ask, because I'm just visiting the country. But of course, I know I've taught a lot of students from Spain, from Spanish-speaking countries, and I've seen that their problems are very specific to their first language. So, for example, those students who are speaking Spanish, the first language, they're going to have difficulties with certain grammatical items. For example, you'd say un gato negro, which in English is a black cat, so that the adjective and the noun are in a different position. There are certain pronunciation difficulties. Spanish has 5 vowel sounds, I believe. A, E, I, O, U. English has 12 with all the diphthongs. So a short vowel like I and a long vowel like E is going to be difficult for a Spanish-speaking student to hear the difference. So there are all these difficulties based on L1, based on the first language of the Spanish student. So there are obviously difficulties, and there are teaching strategies to try and deal with these difficulties. So I'm trying to answer the part of the question that I can answer about Spanish-speaking students. So they have very specific problems, handicaps, difficulties. But in terms of the teachers, I really can't answer. I've only been in Spain a week. So.
You have been talking about the one of the advice, consejos, for the teacher is to learn another language, the language of the country where you are. This is a very common for English teacher that they can speak in Spanish, for example. For us, for the student, it's like a work between the teacher and the student.
Right. Yes.
Perhaps for me, for the other point of view, like the students, this is a big problem because it's
handicap.
Very it's a handicap.
Right. I think it's a big advantage for the teacher to know the first language of the students, because then they'll know what type of problems to expect, what difficulties. They will also know cognates, like nación and nation. They will also know false friends, like embarazada. It doesn't mean embarrassed, it means pregnant. Right?
Yes.
Librería, which doesn't mean library, it means bookshop. So I think if the teacher knows the first language of the students, it's a big advantage, I think. Yes.
Another question is about your paper, like author?
Like an author,
Yes, and author of material for the teacher. ¿Cómo ha ido evolucionando? Change the material for the teacher, for the teaching, with the new technologies, for example, or for another kind of thing?
Yeah, technology is such a huge subject. We could talk for hours about it. I think the key thing is that teachers need to meet students halfway. Now, our students usually know more about technology than the teacher, generally, because the students are generally younger here in Spain, from what I've seen. So the student probably knows a lot about technological developments, and the teacher maybe knows less. But we need to meet in the middle. We also need to reach our students. If all of our students are using mobile phones for everything, for taking films, for looking up words on the dictionary, the teacher has to acknowledge this. Even if the teacher is an older generation, even if the teacher did not learn using a mobile phone, I think the teacher needs to reach out and try to understand the life of a young English learner, the life of young people, how they use technology. So teachers don't need to be experts in technology. They need to be experts in their students. They need to understand their students. Where do the students come from? What do the students need technology for? How do they use technology? Because of course, if the students use a mobile phone, then it becomes a learning tool. Anything the students use can be a learning tool. How do you say tool? Herramienta. something like this.
Yes, even the children use the mobile phone or the tablet or another
Absolutely.
Devices.
yes
Yeah.
to learn English.
Absolutely. So I think if the teacher bans these things, says no, not in the classroom, I think they're missing an opportunity.
It's true. Usted ha recibido muchos premios por su material, todo el material que elabora para profesores. Cuando afronta la redacción o la puesta en marcha de un nuevo libro o material para profesores, ¿de dónde parte? ¿De una necesidad que detecta o de un interés propio por dar a conocer algo que usted domina? ¿Cómo lo hace? ¿De dónde parte?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. So with the books I've written for teachers and students.
Yes. When you start to write,
Yeah.
when you think about, or
Okay.
when you need
What
to...
is your inspiration?
Inspiration?
Yes, inspiration.
Okay. The inspiration always begins with the student. If you're going to write materials for students to learn, you need to be in touch with students, you need to listen to them, you need to watch them, you need to be amongst them if you're going to write good materials. So the inspiration always comes from what the student brings to the class. Now, as we know, all students are different. Some love technology, as we were saying, others don't. Others love other things. But if you're going to be a good teacher and a good writer, you need to have your antenna, like your antenna buzzing and awake, and you need to be listening and trying to understand what the students are interested in. Now it's partly a generational thing. Young students, generally, they do like technology. They might like music, they might watch film. Younger students tend to be very visual. They like big images. They're good with images. They make their own images. They upload them onto Facebook and this kind of thing. So I would say the inspiration comes primarily from the student. Apart from that, we also read very widely. I think if you're going to write, you need to be very curious about the world, about different elements of the world, politics, sport, music, arts, theatre. You need to read everything. The world is full of interesting stories, and you can find them if you're looking. If you have your antenna buzzing, you will find interesting things to write about. The same with writing material for teachers. You need to be with them, you need to speak to teachers, you need to be working together with teachers and find out what's happening with the world of teaching. So I think it's that involvement in the profession that allows you to write about it. They're two different things. Firstly, you're involved, you're in the middle of it, but then as a writer, you step back and you reflect on what you've seen, what you've learned, and then you begin to write.
Another is about your faceta, like fiction writer.
Oh, yes.
With a pseudonym.
Yes.
It's not really a pseudonym, it's my full name.
Yes.
JJ Willson.
Amaworo is your real surname.
It's a real Nigerian name, yes.
Very nice.
Thank you.
¿Qué parte de la realidad y qué parte de ficción debe aplicar un profesor de idiomas a su vida profesional, a su manera de enseñar para estar siempre motivado e ilusionado? Esa mezcla de fiction and reality.
Yeah, fiction and reality. Does a language teacher need daily to continue? Okay, well, for me, the imaginative side, the fictional side of teaching is all about your imaginary self in the future. What kind of teacher could I be in 10 years' time if I continue to develop and improve and learn? Same for the students. They must have a vision of themselves, possibly as great speakers of English. Maybe they get to proficiency level, maybe they passed first certificate, but they need this vision, this goal. And that, of course, is a fiction. It's imaginary. They're imagining themselves as a better version of who they are now, even if that's just they speak better English or they teach better, we teach better. So that vision which is imaginary, is constantly in the back of your mind, and it's something you're working towards constantly. And that it's motivating, because it's a vision of your future self that might help you to become better. It's quite a difficult question, because it's quite abstract, but in terms of looking at fiction and reality, we all know the reality of being a teacher. It's hard work. You're there in front of people every day, maybe 6-8 hours a day. It's tough. You need to find ways of motivating yourself. But then that fictional side, that imaginary side, can motivate you. Imagine how good you could be.
And the last one, I would like that you can give some advice to the new teacher, language teacher.
Yeah, okay.
1, 2, or 3, or...
Yeah. The biggest, most important piece of advice I would give to a new language teacher is to always think of yourself as a student of language teaching. You never know enough. You're never finished. You're never complete. You're never a perfect teacher. You can always learn more. I see it every day with myself. I've been teaching for 20 years. I've read, I don't know, hundreds of books on teaching. I've written 20 books on teaching. There's loads I don't know that I want to know. I'm always learning. And I would say the same about every good teacher of language, of anything. Keep learning, keep learning. I think that's the most important piece of advice. But if there was a language teacher who was about to go into their first class, first minute of language teaching, the advice I would give them is to get the students to do something. Get the students speaking in pairs. Get the students to do something. Don't stand up and be the king on the hill. Get the students working. That's the first thing you need to do. Then you can begin to teach once you've had a breath. But keep learning.
Okay, thank you very much for being here in ASEA conference and in Seville. Thank you very much for this interview.
My pleasure, de nada.